Should adolescents avoid taking dietary supplements? Should the sale of dietary supplements be banned for minors? Tune into the Dr. G Fit YouTube channel where I sit down with attorney Rick Collins, who's a guru on dietary supplement and performance enhancement drug law. Rick and I have known each other for several years and have published some work together. Rick was also a former bodybuilder. Welcome to another episode on the Dr. G Fit YouTube channel. Today I have with me a very special guest and friend, Rick Collins, who is definitely the most jacked attorney that I know. But we have been friends for several years. We've collaborated on some good work. We've got publication out together. If I'm going to let him introduce himself, because if you are in the dietary supplement space, and the bodybuilding, powerlifting, fitness space, you have probably heard of Rick Collins because he has been the legal advisor to many companies and many individuals alike. So Rick, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, thank you, Dr. G Fit. Thanks for having me on today. You and I do go way back. We were just talking about we've done a few papers together. We've did a poster for ISSN, Sports Nutrition Society, a few years ago. So it's fun to be on the show and have a chance to talk with you. I guess I describe myself as the lawyer for the fit and jacked, right? That's that's sort of my space. So if you're in sports nutrition, certainly. If you're in the supplement industry or natural products industry, my firm does work in all of those spaces. And especially if you're in the dark side as well of either natural products or sports nutrition, where you're involved with products where the FDA has some beef with them, or there's some legal problem that's identified with the products, that I also do a lot of. And I've probably handled more cases involving bodybuilding related drugs than any other lawyer. So that would include steroids, SARMs, your growth hormone, peptides as research chemicals, tainted supplements, anything that makes you bigger, faster, stronger, or arguably better, but the government doesn't like it, and it becomes some type of an investigation. I do a lot of that work. And if you're a drug tested athlete or just drug tested, and you fail, let's say, for steroids or some other performance enhancing or image enhancing drug, I get the calls for that. So all of my work is kind of where, bodybuilding and physical enhancement and nutrition intersect with legal issues, which for me is a dream come true, because like you, I was a competitive bodybuilder. So I come from the background of the gym culture, and I was a certified personal trainer, a bodybuilding competitor. I'm NSCA, CSCS, as I think you are as well. So I come from the background of exercise and nutrition and supplements, and a belief in optimizing yourself and being physically your best. So for me to be able to work with so many bodybuilders and athletes and companies that are involved in helping people to look better or to feel better, I love what I do. I get up in the morning. I have some of the greatest clients in the world, and so I'm a happy camper.
Yeah, Rick, I think you're so well-rounded in that regard, and I remember my first run into you. We didn't know each other personally then, but you wrote that book, Legal Muscle. It was probably a couple of decades ago.
It
Uh,
was.
but that was actually a really eye-opening book, and it was nice to really see, because you really kind of talked about some of the different scenarios of, the guys that used to go down to Mexico and buy these things and, transport them across, and some of the
Yeah.
potential implications, the legal implications with some of that. So I really enjoyed reading that book and reading some of the stories that you had. But I think it's very important because I think that's one thing that probably is, I'm going to say, put under the brush under the rug a little bit, is that, some of these, the way that they're currently um, this, I'm going to say, put together, or they're basically looking at, they're illegal, right? They're a substance three
Sure. Yeah, yeah,
substance, and that
yeah.
create, they're classified. That's what I was looking for, classified
Well, yeah, yeah,
under
yeah.
this umbrella, um, and that can lead to some legal trouble. And I think one of the things that I appreciated about you is, sometimes you get an individual who purchases enough stuff for their personal stash uh, and personal use, but then you get these police officers that come in, and now all of a sudden they say, "Well, this is enough to distribute," and it's like, no,
Right.
like this is enough to actually use for for the next couple of months. Um,
100%. Yeah. Yeah. So, I didn't get into, when I first started in my legal career, I didn't plan to be doing what I'm doing, to sort of the fit and jacked law. Really was no such thing. I went to work as a prosecutor so my first job as a lawyer was putting the bad guys in jail. Did that for 5 years, and then went into private practice. And when you say classified steroids as Schedule 3 drugs. Coincidentally, the year that I hung out my shingle with my partners to be in private practice was the same year that Congress took anabolic steroids, which had previously been kind of like in this super vitamin kind of concept among, a very niche small subpopulation of hardcore people in hardcore gyms. And suddenly in 1990, Congress said, look, these things are now going to be controlled and put into the same law with heroin and cocaine. And to the people in the gyms, that didn't make a lot of sense. But it was largely because, you may remember, in 1988, Ben Johnson was the Olympic sprinter from Canada who won, the gold medal in the 100 meters and then tested positive for Winstrol. And suddenly the issue of drugs in sports was thrust into headlines. And the folks in the sports world were like, wait a minute, is this how are sports going to continue if this is just going to be a chemistry contest? And so Congress held a bunch of hearings in the late 1980s, and they decided that the way to get steroids out of sports was to make them Schedule 3 controlled substances, which there's 5 schedules of controlled substances. Number one means no medical uses. So these are controlled drugs. They're, like heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, Vicodin, fentanyl, within that schedule of drugs. And so that took effect in 1991. And suddenly the world of bodybuilding, powerlifting, physical enhancement, gym rats, muscle heads, whatever you want to call the community that you and I have been part of for many years, was suddenly put into the position of drug criminals. And so I created a website called Steroid Law, to kind of begin the process of educating the guys in the gyms and the girls on what the new law meant for them, and also educating the lawyers, the prosecutors, the cops, the agents, the judges about what these drugs were, why people were using them, how they were similar to other scheduled drugs, but mostly how they were different than any other scheduled drugs, because they're the only hormone in the entire Controlled Substances Act, right? And they're all based on the molecule of testosterone, which is present in your body, my body, every man, woman, and child, right? So we're all in possession of testosterone, which is a controlled substance under the law. So I kind of examined some of these, weird anomalies that were created by the law, And I wound up starting to write a column for Muscular Development magazine, which I wrote for almost 25 years, until magazines went the way of the dinosaur, and loved it. Every month I'd write a new column on where kind of fitness and health intersected with policy or law, and what people who are physically fit and into working out or into good nutrition should think about certain things in society. And when I first started writing that column, it was suggested to me to maybe write a book, and that's when I wrote that book, Legal Muscle. That came out in 2002. So yeah, you're right, decades ago. And it's funny because as part of the promotion for the book, I had created some T-shirts and other stuff, and and they sold out, and I had forgotten about them for many years. And recently, a few people had sent me pictures of themselves wearing their old Legal Muscle T-shirts, and they were like, "Why don't you bring them back?" So I said, "You know what? Fine. As a sort of statement to truth and freedom, I actually, made a few. I made a deal with Redbubble on the internet, which custom makes the T-shirts. So I don't know if you can see this,
I,
but
I
I've
can see
actually
it.
got my
There you go. I love it. I love
my
it.
legal muscle shirt. I'll send you one.
Awesome.
I'll hook you up with one. You can wear it in the gym, and so I got my legal muscle cup. So for me, it's nostalgia to remember kind of, a long time ago when I wrote the book, and people seem to like it. Just the idea of legal muscle. I think a lot of cops like it. Any lawyer that works out wants it, and just people who kind of like the idea of making a statement. So natties and not so natties, right? So yeah, so I wrote that, and that book was really about a lot of the stories. Even then, I had represented a lot of people who were involved with steroids, either trafficking, distributing, importing, and in some cases possessing. And like you say, back then, and even to some degree now, the folks who make the arrests, whether federal agents or state people, you know, they think sometimes of steroids as if they're like, pills of Molly or some Vicodin. So if they find 1,000 tablets, let's say, they're looking, wow, we got a big dealer here. We got a major dealer, not realizing this isn't like 1,000 hits of ecstasy. This is like the minimum that could have been ordered from the Thai website that makes 5 milligram D-ball tablets, Anabol tablets. So a lot of what I've done through the years is educating. I've been a consultant on if somebody has a steroid case, they typically I get called in either as the lawyer or as the consultant on the case, and that's led to a lot of other types of SARMs cases, peptide cases, you name it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very related. And one thing that you mentioned earlier, which I want to explore a little bit, was, your fitness journey. I mean, you've been, I mean, you're sort of a personal trainer, you're a strength and conditioning specialist, you've been a bodybuilding competitor, and you've been lifting for decades, right? And your fitness
More
journey,
than that, not
but
centuries, but yeah,
it still
but
continues
yeah,
today.
I think close to 45 years now, or
That's
maybe
yeah.
a little bit
I
more.
love that because I think one of the things I like to really highlight is I like to motivate others because people use age as an excuse of
Right.
getting weaker and doing less and it's that mentality of because I'm older I can't do XYZ, but
No,
I think it's the opposite, right? Is because you're older you should actually be exercising more, you should be doing more
100%.
activities. So can you share a little bit about, your current lifting regimen? And I mean, I've seen you're still a beast in the gym.
Thank you,
So
brother.
I'd love to maybe highlight some of your recent gym victories.
Oh, well, that's very kind. Yeah, I mean, anybody and I invite everybody to follow me on Instagram at Rick Collins ESQ, because I do post information about the steroid world, about the natural products world, supplements, all things that muscle heads would be interested in, or anybody who's really a gym goer or serious about their health and fitness. But I also throw in some, I think a couple of weeks ago, I threw in what I was doing on the squat. You adapt as you age. You have to adapt your routines. You may not. My days of doing doubles and triples in the flat bench. My best bench was 440. As a single, I'm not going to do that anymore. So you adapt, but that doesn't mean you don't train with great intensity. That doesn't mean you don't still have the goals to maximize your ability. And you control your ego, but it doesn't mean it goes away. So instead of back squats, as your shoulders become a little bit less flexible, and you can either use the safety squatting bar, or you can use the belted squat. And I happen to train at Bev's on Long Island, Steve Weinberger's phenomenal gym, Bev Francis gym in Syosset, New York. Fantastic place to train. And he's got the Pit Shark, the belted squat machine. So I've, instead of squatting with a back squat with the bar on my shoulders, I'm doing 7 plates on each side on the belted squat. And for me, at a guy, after all these years of lifting, just to be able to still lift heavy, and feel good. And as you probably saw, there's been some recent research into the correlation between quad strength, leg strength, and health span, and healthy aging and longevity. And the stronger your legs are, the better you are as you age. And so you hit the nail on the head. I don't think we stop lifting because we got older. I think we get older, and we decide to stop lifting, and that's never a good idea.
Absolutely. No, I love it. And I know you still carry some 20-inch guns there on either side. I think you need legal permits for those things.
There you go. Yeah. Well, there's some pictures of that on my Instagram too. So yeah, people can follow me, and if anybody ever has a legal question or something like that, I try to make myself accessible and open to anybody with questions.
That's great. And one thing I wanted to highlight too is, I think sometimes as people go through careers, I mean, you're an established professional, you've had a successful legal career, and you're a family man, so in all of these decades, fitness has always been a part of your routine, hasn't it?
Yeah.
You've made it a priority.
Yeah, I remember when I was probably 17 years old. I didn't grow up with great means at all. So I was living in a second floor with my mom above, in a two-family house in a little attic, and I was sitting on the steps of the house, and I was talking to the landlord, who was like, "Oh, you're starting college. Well, that's going to be a lot of work." And I had started lifting when I was maybe 16. Uh, Once you're in college, forget about it. You're not going to be able to be lifting like you are. And I continued. And then when I was going to law school, oh, you're starting law school now. You're never going to be able to keep lifting. And of course, I lifted through law school. And then, well, now you're having a family, so you're never gonna. So I adapted. There was a period of time where I was training at 9:30 at night, because when my kids were very young, I wanted to come home from work, spend a little time with them, put them to bed, and then go to the gym. So it's either very early morning or late at night. And there were years where I would train at 9:30. But I can tell you, Guillermo, I don't think that there was, other than maybe an injury here or there was never a period of time, in all these almost 50 years, that I wasn't lifting consistently through the week. There might have been some times where I went down to 3 days a week, because I think, as you know, I was acting for a while. I was in another lifetime, I was an actor, and did a few things. And I wanted to downsize, so I actually lost some size and was training more for fitness. And so I was training more like 3 days a week and doing more cardio. But for the vast majority of my lifespan, I've been in the gym lifting heavy. And I don't see that age is a factor for that. You adapt. You may have shoulder injuries, you may have low back, you may not be doing, 700 pound deadlifts, but you adapt, and there are ways of intensifying training, as you know, besides just the weight, right? I mean, there's many ways of intensifying an exercise. There's supersetting. There's doing more reps. There's slow repetitions. There's controlled negatives. There's so many ways of maximizing, and I still think like a bodybuilder. I still eat like a bodybuilder. I still, I'm still looking at meals from a macronutrient, standpoint. I mean, it becomes embedded in our DNA. And so, and I'm probably not the only lawyer that thinks this way. And every now and then I'll get contacted by a law student, typically. I was the only one in law school. There was me and another lawyer, a female law student, who were into bodybuilding, but there were very few back then. Now it's more common. It's become a little more mainstream, and so I'll get contacted by law students who are like, "Oh, I see you on Instagram or I see you on social media, and I want to be a lawyer to the fitness community too." And I always try to mentor any young law student. I speak a lot to young law students to try to inspire them to follow your dreams and follow your passion. I never imagined that I would be when I was a young bodybuilder in college. I never imagined that my profession would circle around my passions and my interests. I couldn't have imagined. But that's the way life has worked out, and I'm just very blessed for it.
Yeah, I know. I love it. I love that you've been able to really, follow your passion and into your profession and made everything align. And I love to hear that story because I really like to highlight that with individuals that sometimes need a little push, a little motivation. And I think people like you can help motivate those folks. So it's great. Well, let's dive into some of the things that we wanted to touch on today. So, one thing that I know that you recently posted on, and this is the whole concept of creatine being at least threatened to be distributed or sold to younger kids, right? To
Right.
underage kids. So can you touch on that just briefly?
Yeah, so in a number of states, there are pending bills in the state legislatures that would attempt to ban the sale of either muscle building or weight loss supplements to anybody under the age of 18. And that's actually passed in New York. So New York has already banned muscle building and weight loss supplements, which include in New York creatine monohydrate. Creatine is considered, one of the ingredients that's banned. So, and there are other states that are doing the same thing with similar laws. Some of them, New York excludes protein as a standalone. So, like a whey protein powder would not be banned for a sale to, let's say, a 17-year-old football player. But if you combine the protein with creatine, then it is banned.
Right.
But in other states, the bills do not exclude protein.
Wow.
So you might have a situation where it's a violation of law to sell a jug of whey protein to a 16 or a 17-year-old. And the reason, I mean, it sounds, for us in the bodybuilding or muscle community, it sounds kind of crazy because when I was 16, 17, I was living on protein supplements and you know, I love them, and I still take whey protein. It's one of the healthiest things you can have, and creatine is one of the most, if not the most, researched, sports nutrition ingredient ever.
Right.
And so, with lots of beneficial, we keep finding new beneficial
Right.
purposes to creatine. So why would they do this? And the purported reason is that these weight loss or muscle building products cause, this is the claim, cause eating disorders in teenagers. Now, there's an organization out of Harvard that purports that they've made this connection, and they're going around the country to different legislatures lobbying for this to happen. One of our mutual friends, Dr. Sue Hewlings, has done a good deal of deep diving into the validity of the claim. And her position is the emperor has no clothes. That
Right.
this is not a valid claim. This is, these things don't cause eating disorders. Eating disorder is a psychological issue, and it needs to be treated as such, as a disorder, whether it's, anorexia or even bulimia or even muscle dysmorphia. Whatever kind of body image issue, and maybe social media plays into it, and the pressure of looking a certain way based on the attention of social media. But the idea that the product somehow caused the disorder, is challenged, by Sue's research, and to me, just intellectually, doesn't really make much sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And dissecting that a little bit, first of all, like a protein powder, let's just take that simple one. I mean, whey protein, is derived from milk, right? And then and so is casein protein. They're both derived from milk,
Yeah.
different ways of processing them, but ultimately
Mhm.
that's
Sure.
where they come from. Um, And in fact, when you're drinking milk, you are in fact drinking whey protein
Right.
in the indirect form, right? Not in an isolated form, but you're drinking, some sort of whey protein. In casein, same thing. Uh, and the other thing is really these protein powders. Um, Anybody that is within the bodybuilding fitness industry, I mean, it's really like a convenient way to eat a piece of chicken or consume some eggs or some egg whites. I mean, that's basically all it comes to. I mean, we try to probably consume a majority of our foods from whole food sources, right? But at the end of the day, if you're short on time, maybe in the morning or right after a workout, you only have a few minutes to slug something down. It's very convenient to consume 25, 30, 50 grams of protein. And it just mix it with a little water and then off you go. Or it can be a little treat. I like to serve mine sometimes like a little pudding. I put a tiny bit of water and then it's like a little chocolate pudding or a vanilla pudding. It tastes
Right.
delicious.
Yep.
It's a lot less calories than a normal ice cream would be,
Or
and it provides me with better nutrients that I'm going to actually utilize. And then of course creatine. Now we have a derivative of an amino acid that our body naturally produces, right? And your body makes this thing on its own, and you also find it in other food, right? You find it in fish, you find it in beef,
meat. Yep. Mhm.
and when so you're it would be like eliminating, it's like, well, then you can't eat more than 2 pounds of meat because it's gonna meet the threshold for your 3 grams of creatine. I mean, it's
Right.
pretty insane when you see it. And the thing that you highlighted is, I mean, like creatine monohydrate is probably the most researched dietary supplement on the market. And over again, it has proven to be safe, and it has been shown to be effective in many, many ways. In addition to the muscle building, performance enhancement properties, now we see a lot of clinical applications for the use of creatine. And we actually see that more, not less people should actually be taking creatine because our body doesn't produce enough, and most people really don't have saturated muscle creatine levels. So
Right.
and there are benefits to doing that. So I think it's very interesting that they're taking that away. And
Yeah, and I think I think, I mean, it's hard to know what they're thinking, but I think that it's less. They gave creatine as an example, and protein as an example of the category, but I think it's primarily that the category of having supplement products out there that encourage kids to build muscle or lose weight is in and of itself going to make them have an eating disorder. So just seeing an advertisement for build muscle on a supplement product is, that is going to make the adolescent into having this disorder. which to me makes no scientific sense whatsoever. I think if anything, it's the social media pressure and things like that might trigger somebody who has some body image issues to want to you know exercise some kind of bad judgment.
Right.
But I also think that certainly eating disorders are a huge problem for those affected, and I in no way want to make light of it, but statistically most of the health problems for adolescents are not that they are spending too much time in the gym or eating foods that are, overly strict in macronutrient ratio. We have an epidemic of adolescent and childhood obesity and a
Yes.
national epidemic of obesity where more than 70% of Americans are now overweight and obese. I think the bigger problem, I mean, if we really want to help the majority of the people, I think, getting people into the gyms and getting them more conscious about getting themselves in shape is probably, would do more good, especially when this particular route that they're taking to try to address the legitimate problem of teen eating disorders appears really not to be even connected causally in any way to me.
Yeah, no, I can't highlight that enough. I was actually thinking along those same lines. I think the bigger problem is childhood obesity, adolescent obesity, lack of activity with those individuals, and that actually translates over into, adulthood, right? Where we actually see, close to 70% of adults being overweight or obese, and we're actually moving less and not being so conscientious.
Yeah,
And
and the
that
sins of the childhood obesity issue is something that does affect you years later. You're more prone to adult obesity and reaching the point where we've got such a high rate now of type 2 diabetes and heart issues, and everybody's on Lipitor. So some consciousness of, hey, I do need to be more active. I do need to maybe lose a little weight. I do need to make myself healthier is from the vast majority of teens something I think that's positive.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And even when we see some of the physical fitness standards, from when kids were back and they were tested, years ago. I mean, the results of those physical fitness tests of kids in the 60s, 70s, and 80s compared to the kids of today, I mean, man, in terms of just body composition and ability to run, to do pull-ups, or just, hanging from a bar, I mean, we see just significant decreases in their ability to do any of those normal physical activities that most kids, again, that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s now, we're in a much different state, physical state. And so now what we see is some of these laws coming in, actually, I think they're paying attention to almost the wrong thing. It's like, that might affect a small percentage of the population, but we have a much bigger population we can actually pay attention to and really have a positive impact on.
Right. And we're probably not doing enough for. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And that kind of leads me, I'm going to go ahead and share this actual study here. So let me pull this up. So this study here just came out in 2024, and I know that you posted on this as well. You can see it, okay? Yes?
I can. Yep.
Yeah, perfect. So this was the Performance Enhancement and Health describing use of muscle building supplements among adolescents and young adults in Canada. And this study was fairly interesting. Some of the things that it basically discussed is, again, muscle building supplements among adolescents and young adults, looking at a kind of harm reduction, telling doctors that, hey, maybe they should even be sent out for psychiatric help. So can you talk on this a little bit?
Yeah. I think the push to pathologize the use of supplements has existed for quite a while, and this came out of a Toronto university, And it appears to really try to say that, somebody who's using dietary supplements as a young person should be evaluated for psychiatric disorders. Talk about overly pathologizing a population. I think it's quite the opposite. If you're trying to improve your health and you're trying to improve your physical condition, especially based on all the things that you've just said, that's normalcy. That's what you should be trying to do. If you're not doing that, maybe it's because you are depressed. Maybe it's because you have anxiety. Maybe it's for a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of reasons that are not good. Um, it seems like some of these researchers just have an anti-supplement bias.
Yes.
And, more broadly, I think the media loves to pick up on that. How you always, I have a Google alert for supplement, headlines. And the media loves just that supplements are unregulated, supplements are dangerous. There's a supplement that may be killing you. All of that is negative. It's rare that you see anything positive about supplements, either for younger people or for anybody. And yet we're one of the, I think we're the only country that allows pharmaceutical drugs to be advertised directly to the consumers, where we're told, ask your doctor about some new patented drug that they can't wait to get you on, and nobody's writing anything bad about.
Yeah, no, and one thing that came across that I really, when I read this study, is I looked at this table 7, which is looking at reported symptoms during use of muscle building supplements in the last 12 months. And, they have a bunch listed here. I mean, they have things listed like fever, night sweats, loss of appetite, rashes, dry mouth, digestive issues, diarrhea. When you really look at this, I mean, you could fill in the blank here and say, instead of reported symptoms during use of blank, and if any of these symptoms would appear, reported symptoms during eating strawberries during the
Yeah,
last 12 months,
right.
and all of these would probably appear in the same way. And this is where what they didn't really highlight on this study is they didn't really put like a cause and effect. In other words, just because these symptoms appeared over the last 12 months does not mean that these dietary supplements are the cause of these
Right,
symptoms. They're
right.
independently associated, but yet they're creating an association out of thin air, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's something I think very important for people to always keep in mind, is that there's a difference between causality and correlation. Causality being, this one thing causes this other thing. Correlation is that, this happens and this also happens, but the relationship between them is not clear, right? So, it may be that some teens who have eating disorders do use some dietary supplements, a weight loss product. If you have a psychological disorder where you're anorexic and you want to avoid food and just get barely enough calories to continue to reduce, maybe you would be choose to use, some sort of a weight loss product. But that doesn't mean that the weight loss product caused the eating disorder. The
Exactly.
eating disorder is what's making you seek out that product. And so, this issue of what causes is something I think that gets lost in a lot of research, and they'll imply causality where, none exists.
None exists. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that they looked at here too, where they made this again, this association implying causality is, use of dietary supplements leads to or is highly associated with use of anabolic steroid use. I'm like, well, probably, I mean, I would probably vouch to say that if you sample most anabolic steroid users, it's probably a pretty close one-to-one relationship where they
Right,
actually use dietary supplements.
right,
Because
right.
guess what? You're probably taking protein. You're probably like, if you're a bodybuilder and you happen to be enhanced, you're there's a probably a high probability that you also take muscle building dietary supplements. Doesn't mean that
100%.
you doesn't necessarily mean that because you took those dietary supplements, it led to the anabolic
No,
steroid.
because statistically, most people who use dietary supplements, including protein powders, don't move on to use steroids, right? So there's the proof that it's not a causality issue. And look, I would hazard to say that most people who use anabolic steroids had previously drank milk, right? So I mean, you can use anything and say because one thing preceded the other, somehow that makes it cause. Um, it's crazy. We're getting into crazy time with that.
Yeah, and that's what I see a lot of these, I think you're right that the media loves to get take excerpts of the manuscript and then they make it news, and I think sometimes the authors themselves maybe they have an agenda
Sure.
against certain things and a bias, and then they just display the data or run the statistics in such a way where it highlights their bias instead of
Right.
actually highlighting what the data really shows.
Yeah, they go into the research with confirmation bias. They know what they're looking for and they find it and they pull it out. Years and years ago, when steroids were first appearing in sports in the 1980s, I guess the powers in sports medicine decided, hey, we don't like this. We want to discourage people from using anabolic steroids. And the best way to do it, they thought at the time, was to try to prove that steroids don't work. They
Yes.
don't enhance, physical performance. I guess it depends how you define that. I guess, you're not gonna steroids are not gonna make you, connect with the ball as a batter, better than if you weren't on it. So obviously, it's not gonna make you more agile or in some way. But does it improve musculature? Well, they rigged the studies to show that steroids don't work at all. And the way they did that was by using such tiny amounts that they would have no effect. They probably just suppressed natural testosterone production. And then when they rigged the study to show steroids don't work, they then broadcast that to the steroid using community to say, here, stop using steroids because they don't work. The problem, of course, was that everybody who was using steroids knew that that was complete BS.
Right.
And once they realized that the medical community was lying to them, their credibility, the credibility of the medical community was gone, and
Yeah.
they never really reclaimed it. And the problem with that is that when the medical community began to talk about side effects, and every drug has side effects, and including anabolic steroids, and certainly the devil is in the dose, as you know, the difference between a medicine and a poison can be the dose, right? A glass of wine with dinner at night, a little bit of resveratrol, some, maybe a little bit of thinning of the blood from the alcohol, not a bad thing. A gallon of scotch a night, you're going to get very sick over a period of time. So the devil's in the details and the dose. And rather than explaining that when the medical community started talking about health effects, they exaggerated them and didn't kind of left the dose out and made it seem as if the person taking one cc of testosterone was the same as the guy taking a gram of testosterone. And when you make those false claims and you dumb things down, the community of people who really should be educated and should be aware of the risks that they're undertaking, they stop listening.
Yeah.
And that's a bad thing. I think, and if anything, if Legal Muscle was sort of, my book to kind of cut through all that and tell the truth. There's still some copies probably somewhere on eBay, but it's been out of print for years and years. But, to me, tell people the truth, let people make up their own minds. I do believe that we should have some level of personal autonomy over our own bodies. Look, and you and I have talked about this before, we allow people to make some very bad decisions legally, right? I'm actually planning to do a solo skydive with David Sandler in May, pulling my own ripcord and, trying to land my canopy and all of that. And, statistically it's safe, relatively statistically, but there's risk there, and there are people who would say, that why take that risk, that's crazy. But nobody says it's illegal to do it, right?
Right.
I could go to a fast food restaurant, 3 meals a day, eat 5,000 calories per meal, eat my way into type 2 diabetes. Nobody's going to stop me,
Right.
right? I mean, I can get cosmetic surgery of all sorts of types, taking risks of anesthesia, infection, bad results, whatever. People have died from botched liposuctions, right? I mean, women have had terrible problems with breast implants over the years. Um, all of that is allowed, and in some cases, really, some of the cosmetic procedures just for vanity's sake, under the theory that, hey, if I look better to myself in the mirror, what's wrong with that? Why shouldn't I be happy with the way I look? And if I want, to have I'm getting saggy in the face and I want to have a facelift, or I want to do a tummy tuck or whatever it is, who is somebody else to tell me not to do that? And there is that personal autonomy that we accept as a society. But yet when it comes to anabolic steroids, none of that applies. And there is no legal cosmetic use of anabolic steroids under a doctor's supervision in the United States. In other countries, it's different,
Right.
but here it's not. And I often use the analogy. If you were to go into the doctor's office and say, listen, I want bigger biceps and bigger pecs, the doctor could suggest prostheses. I can give you bicep implants. I can give you pec implants, and they will push out the muscle, and you'll look better. I'll subject you to the risks of surgery and anesthesia and all these other, potentially, deadly risks that you'll take. But if you say, well, what if you prescribe me, a 10-week regimen of anabolic steroids, closely monitored and supervised by you to make sure that it's, I get no, at least short-term effects of it. How about that? If the doctor went along with that, he'd be arrested because that's a felony. And
Right.
so, there is a disconnect. And so Legal Muscle, I think, was talked in great detail. And there's no easy answers, and people feel passionately in both sides. I'm not an advocate for or against specifically, other than I'm a huge advocate and proponent for truth above all else, objective information, not lying to people, not hiding things, as well as I do tend to favor personal freedoms and
Right.
and the idea that people should have, we should err on the side of freedom as long as it's not hurting somebody else, but that people may have the right and should have the right to make their own decisions, even if they're decisions that others would not agree with, whether it's skydiving or whether it's eating in a fast food restaurant or whether it's using anabolic steroids under the supervision of a doctor. I don't know whether the law will ever change to allow that in this country, even though in other countries it's different. Um, you know, um, I'm impressed by the Health and Human Services Secretary's workouts. RFK Jr., training at Gold's is in Gold's Venice. I've watched him he's 70, I guess, or maybe a little bit more. He's got a six pack. He, has stated publicly that he's on TRT. Um, as soon as he was, confirmed, within a few weeks, the FDA removed the black box warning off testosterone products
I saw that.
that had been on since 2015, basically saying that this product will, subject you to the risks of cardiovascular disease and stroke and heart attack and all these other things. You and I have known for years that was BS. Those sort of
Yeah,
warnings
not
were
at the medically
completely
prescribed
unfounded.
dosages for TRT. Yeah.
Right. But for 10 years, that was on a package and had a chilling effect on doctors and on patients. Um, Wiped away, finally gone. So who knows? Maybe there'll be changes coming in terms of some of these issues.
Well, and kind of a quick segue. We only have a few minutes left, but the
Hmm.
enhanced games is basically what this kind of is trying to, look ahead into the
Together.
future and make
Yeah.
these changes, which has been very exciting. I know Jose Antonio and I from the ISSN, we were part of the enhanced games second conference on human
I
performance in
saw you went
England.
out to the UK.
We did, and one of the things that we actually co-authored with along 40 or 50 other scientists from different parts of the world was the declaration for the enhanced games, which talks specifically about some of the things that you touched on, which is, number one, it's kind of like really pushing the human limits without any barriers, and this is technology, you make the use of it. And then the right to personally choose and have sovereignty over in your own body. So this was one of the other major components of it. And then the truthfulness was something that really stood out in that component as well, because realistically, we know in sport today, even those that are drug tested, there are many ways to pass these drug tests, and I'm not going to say every athlete is using stuff, but I'm going to say there is a good percentage of athletes that do use performance enhancement substances that just know how to pass the test, and they know what to
Right.
use, they know when to cycle off, uh, they know how to play the game, and we're still seeing them enhanced in a way, shape, or form, but in a way deceiving the public, deceiving the public because the public doesn't want to know what it takes to break those world records and see those things accomplished. And this is what the enhanced games is really trying to get rid of is let's put it out in the open, let's be truthful, let's put it out on the table, and not only that, but let's take it a step further and let's actually examine what the effects are of these different compounds and how much can we push the envelope while monitoring health, monitoring safety. That's kind of the number one purview of the enhanced games is really to use these substances, but not at the expense of their health. So we're really going to be these athletes are going to be highly monitored, highly tested, by medical practitioners. I mean, all technology put full blast ahead. MRIs, blood work on a regular basis, and then actually using these substances off label per se, because none of these are prescribed, no, they're not FDA approved to run faster or to bench more or to
Right.
build muscle. They're
Right.
they're meant for medical prescription of other, I mean, yes, building muscle, but for people that have, HIV or people that are
Hmm.
burn victims in that regard,
Sure.
not for
Yeah.
performance. So
Right.
it's very interesting, and I think it's very exciting to be part of that and to be part of that movement and to see that it's almost something that I people like you and I have probably have wanted coming for so many years, and now it's slowly getting here.
Well, I have seen too some talk about extending the careers of older players and exploring that within the context of the enhanced games. And that brings up, you probably saw this week because I posted it on my Instagram and it also got some headlines, was that Red Sox former player Mo Vaughn
Oh, yes.
um, has admitted now that based on a nagging knee injury or knee problem that he had, he used human growth hormone in violation of Major League Baseball rules, and he's come clean on it. And so yeah, that's right there. The example of what you're saying is that there are players who are using performance enhancement substances and not getting caught during their careers. But it's interesting that his mindset for using it was extending his career, was to kind of continue playing and eke out a living for himself, for his family, whatever. Um, and it doesn't seem like an evil motivation, and if it's with informed consent and he understands the risks, you kind of have to wonder, ethically, why are we necessarily stopping him, right? Because, he would be able to use painkillers to mask it. That's not really good. He'd be able to use cortisone injections to diminish the tendon, inflammation. That's not really good. He'd be able to have multiple surgeries to try to muck around in it. Probably not good either. And so why do we demonize some of these? If it has to do with performance enhancement and it's a drug, why are we demonizing it? And I think what it all comes back to, to circle back to the beginning, is it comes back to Ben Johnson's 1988 win and the amount of vitriol within the sports world about this idea of cheating attached to the use of these substances, that I'm not sure that a guy who's using it at the tail end of his career in order to get another year or two of playing is the kind of cheater that deserves, public humiliation or, banishment. And so, these are interesting issues, and it's going to be interesting to see how things like the enhanced games and how the new administration maybe wrestle with some of these, these ethical issues.
Absolutely. Well, Rick, I wanted to say thank you for coming on. Thank you for being here. Always insightful. Always great to have a nice conversation with you. I will definitely catch up with you in Florida in a few months. And go ahead and say again where people can find you on social media.
So yeah, I'm easy to find on social media. I think I'm most active lately on Instagram at Rick Collins ESQ, like Esquire lawyer Rick Collins ESQ, and that's probably where you'll find a lot of stuff. If you go to my bio there, you can find numerous podcasts and links to things that I've written and lots of other interesting stuff. And if you want to see some of my recent lifting, maybe I'll post something in the next couple of weeks on that too. Just for the old guys to kind of inspire the guys of a certain age. I'm not 25 anymore or 35, but I still, lift heavy, and I don't intend to stop. And I try to kick it old school all the time.
I love it. Thanks so much, Rick. And it's great to have you here. Good to see you again.